The NFL trade deadline is officially past us. We're into the double-digit weeks of the season now. This is the true crunch time stretch of the season where teams really need to start locking in and locking down those fantasy playoff spots. And if you're tuning into this episode, you're one of the real ones who is still in that championship contender territory here in the 2025 season. I'm John Macri, joined as always by Nathan Jahnke. And for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast, we'll be going over all of the top waiver wire options heading into week 11. Nate, like I said at the top, this is a really important stretch here for fantasy football because, it could make or break time, right? To help people get into the fantasy playoffs over the next few weeks or so. So hopefully we can continue to help them do that.
Yeah, interesting time of the year where the trade deadline's passed, so we don't get to speculate of who could or could not get moved. And it's a time of the year where most of the teams have had their bye weeks. We only have 10 more teams who haven't had their bye week left. So it's really time to start rethinking who's on your bench in your fantasy league. If someone's not going to be starting for you at any point over the rest of the season, you should probably be dropping them and picking up some high upside player who could have a big impact over the second half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good call. And yeah, we're gonna talk about a few of those players here this week. And like you said, yeah, bye week's kind of weirdly paced here in the next 4 weeks or so. I think we only got two teams on a bye this week. And then it's I think four and then none and then four again, right?
Yep.
So it's yeah, could have been spread out a little bit more, but I understand. I guess they didn't want to give anybody Thanksgiving week off because yeah, who wants to spend time with their family and stuff like that, right? But no, we'll figure it out here as we go, obviously. But like Nate said, there's still plenty to kind of figure out as we go into the fantasy playoffs. But we'll be talking about all the waiver wire targets here heading into week 11. And if you do want access to the written version of this article, you can get access to that with a PFF Plus subscription. Nate has that written up and on the website right now. And you could use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off of that, along with everything else on the website, all the written content, all the rankings, all the player grades, everything there. So make sure to do that. And if you would be so kind to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, if you're watching here as well, we greatly appreciate that. And it helps a ton. So, all right, Nate, we're going to get into it here. Quarterbacks are leading us off as always. And the always elite Joe Flacco as well leads the way here at the quarterback position for the waiver wire targets. Is, going into the team's bye week last week and in the span of games since joining the Bengals for the NFL, or he led the NFL in passing yards, passing touchdowns. He was QB2 for fantasy and he's still available in 65% of leagues. Now, Joe Burrow is apparently nearing a return, but not just yet, Nate.
Yeah. Honestly, the quarterback position is probably the weakest one on the waiver wire this week. A lot of the guys who should be rostered are rostered. If you look at the guys who performed the best last week, it was guys like Davis Mills, Mac Jones, both of which could be on benches as soon as this upcoming week. And then guys like Dylan Gabriel, Jacoby Brissett, mostly did well because they scored touchdowns, weren't all that effective passing the ball, and we haven't seen that kind of consistency this season. So a lot of the guys that we're talking about on the waiver wire for quarterback this week are simply the guys that we've been talking about, guys who have good matchups upcoming, those kind of things. Flacco, like you said, has been excellent ever since becoming a starter, has a decent schedule over these next couple weeks. They face the Pittsburgh Steelers next week. They played them a couple weeks ago, and Flacco did just fine in that game. So I expect Flacco to continue to be a fantasy starter for these next few weeks. But as you said, Joe Burrow, they started his practice window yesterday, so he's going to be coming back to the active roster sometime in the next 3 weeks. Jay Glazer reported he thinks it's going to be by Thanksgiving, so that really only gives Flacco 2 more weeks as a fantasy starter. I wouldn't be surprised if Burrow needs another week and was just being a little optimistic about when he's coming back, because this is a lot earlier than the initial reports were. So wouldn't be surprised if we get 3 more weeks of Joe Flacco, but he is someone who can help fantasy managers reach the fantasy playoffs. He's not going to be someone who's going to help someone in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, that's a good call. And yeah, we'll see what happens with Joe Burrow, because you're right. A bit surprising that, he's already back practicing. And yeah, it was a limited practice, right? So he's not necessarily coming back this week or next week, but it seems like he's pushing for a return as soon as he can. And I mean, we'll see if that makes a difference for the Bengals or not. I mean, it's not really their offense that's the problem. Maybe, Joe Flacco could spend some time on defense and be an impact playmaker there. But yeah, I doubt it. So we'll see what happens there. But I do still like Joe Flacco. I'm with you for the next few weeks here. And Next up, we also have JJ McCarthy, obviously back starting at quarterback for the Vikings. Wasn't necessarily his best game in week 10 against the reinvigorated Ravens defense, but he did add some production with his legs, and he definitely should get some better matchups ahead, Nate.
Oh, yeah, it was good to see him run the ball. He did throw for 248 yards and a touchdown as well. So he did put up a decent amount of passing stats, even though it took him plenty of passing attempts to get there. But like you said, there's a lot of good upcoming matchups, especially once you start getting to the fantasy playoffs. He faces Chicago next week, which is a pretty decent matchup. So if you are in a league, it's possible he could be your fantasy starter this upcoming week. Follows that up with two tough matchups against the Packers and the Seahawks. But really, what's important is the last 4 weeks of the fantasy season, where he faces Washington, Dallas, the New York Giants, and Detroit. The three NFC East teams all finished near the bottom in terms of allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. Detroit's there as well. So McCarthy just had 19.9 fantasy points against Detroit in week 9. So McCarthy should be putting up a decent amount of fantasy points in the fantasy playoffs, and the week leading up to the fantasy playoffs could very well be a top 12 fantasy quarterback over that stretch of time. So while Flacco is the top option if you need a quarterback in the short term, I think McCarthy is the best option if you need a quarterback for the long term.
Nice. I like that. All right. We also, I like this too. We're kind of showing some love to the old guys this week, old man Flacco and now Aaron Rodgers. It's not often that we get to cover too many NFL players who are older than me. So I'm glad that we have some old man representation here. Aaron Rodgers of the Pittsburgh Steelers next up on the waiver target list. Neat.
Oh, yeah, luckily we get to do that for at least a couple more years, hopefully. But Rodgers, it was not a great performance for him this past week. So not going to pay too much attention to that. The big thing is he's facing the Cincinnati Bengals this week. The Bengals have allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Rodgers faced Cincinnati in week 7, scored 24.6 fantasy points. So Rodgers is here specifically if you need a quarterback. This upcoming week, I would trust him against Cincinnati, would drop him after that game, but he does have some nice matchups later on in the season as well. So if the other quarterbacks we talked about aren't available and you're in need of a quarterback, Rodgers could be your best option, not just for this week, but for the long term as well.
Yeah, and he's had some solid performances this year, right? For fantasy purposes, QB7 twice on the year, and like you said, one of those games came against that Bengals defense. So it does at least inspire confidence in me, at least, that I maybe even I could throw at least 150 yards on that Bengals defense. So I'm sure a future Hall of Famer like Aaron Rodgers will have some production this week going against them. So yeah, like that call for this week. And then lastly, Tua Tagovailoa shocked the world by helping the Dolphins beat the Bills this past week. Threw a couple touchdowns. Threw some picks in there as well, but could be a matchup based fill-in, Nate.
Oh, yeah. He's the quarterback that if you're in a 12-team league, a lot of the quarterbacks we already talked about are probably not available in the 12-team leagues or deeper leagues. In 12-team leagues, it's often just around 8 or so quarterbacks who are available. And Tua, I think, is the best option among those quarterbacks, not just this week, but going forward as well. Favorable matchup against the Washington Commanders this week. Then they have their bye after that. But then most of their matchups are pretty solid over the rest of the season. I have excellent ones against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Cincinnati Bengals along the way. So if you're in one of these deeper leagues where the quarterbacks we talked about are already taken and you are in need of a quarterback, Tua is probably your best option regardless of short term, long term. This week, he's probably the best guy.
Makes sense. All right. Before we go on to the running backs, I want to let everybody know that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. As the days get shorter and colder, it can really take a toll on how we feel. This time of year can be tough for a lot of people. It's a great reminder to reach out and check in with the people you care about. Maybe that means calling your grandma, writing a letter to a friend, finally grabbing lunch with someone that you haven't seen in a while. We're all healthier when we stay connected, when we have a community and support. And just like reaching out to a friend, starting therapy can take a bit of courage. Once you do, you might find yourself wondering, why didn't I do this sooner? BetterHelp makes it easy to start therapy. You'll be matched with a licensed therapist based on your needs and preferences so you can focus on your growth and goals. Over 12 years of experience, more than 30,000 therapists, over 5 million people helped worldwide. And if you're not happy with your match, you can switch therapists anytime with no hassle. This month, don't wait to reach out, whether that's checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself. BetterHelp makes it easier to take that first step. Our listeners get 10% off the first month at betterhelp.com/PFF. That's betterhelp.com/PFF. All right, on to the running back position now, Nate. And you've loaded us up with options here, starting with Blake Corum of the Los Angeles Rams, whose opportunity has greatly improved here recently.
Yeah, there were a lot of interesting things that happened at running back this past week. There's no clear and obvious top running back. A lot of it just depends on what your team need is. And Corum is someone where he has seen more opportunities these past 2 weeks. The Rams have started to implement a rotation by drive where Kyron Williams would take the first drive, Corum would take the second drive, and they would go back and forth. That leads to more fantasy production by Williams because he gets a first drive, and they are perfectly fine having Williams have the final drive of the first half and then the first drive of the second half. So naturally, Williams is going to get more playing time because of that. But there are going to be games where Corum is seeing just as much fantasy production, if not more, assuming the Rams continue this. And this has been successful for the Rams. The Rams offense has been excellent these past couple weeks, scoring at least 34 points, and that's leading both running backs to get double-digit touches. So I think Corum is someone that, even though he's the backup for Los Angeles, there's a lot of backfields where I don't necessarily want to usually have any of the running backs in those backfields. So there are going to be some teams that have two fantasy viable running backs, and the Rams are going to be one of those teams going forward. So if you need a running back, I think he is a fine player to pick up because he not only has that standalone value, but he also has the handcuff value, like all of these other running backs we're going to talk about have. And that if Kyron Williams suffers an injury, then Corum's going to be the guy. So all these other running backs have the handcuff value. Corum also has some standalone value to go along with that.
Yeah, for sure. And 3 straight games now with double-digit carries for Blake Corum, 12, 13, and 13. He didn't do that once across 14 games last year, right? So definitely a little bit of a shift here for this backfield as we see Blake Corum start to get more involved. So like you said, there's obviously handcuff value there, but he's somebody that is getting touches in this backfield and could be productive for those deeper leagues in fantasy. Nate, Tyler Algier has been the ultimate vulture to Bijan Robinson managers this season, but for non-Bijan fantasy managers, that means there's some value that we can maybe piggyback off of here with Algier, who is coming off a 2-touchdown game now.
Oh yeah, Algier had the 2 touchdowns. He also had a decent number of carries, and you can see a pretty clear trend throughout these past couple years with Algier in that if the Falcons are winning games, Algier gets plenty of touches. If the Falcons are losing games or playing from behind, Algier is not getting that many touches. So the Falcons, luckily, in the next 3 games, face the Carolina Panthers, New Orleans Saints, and New York Jets. 3 teams where the Falcons should stay fairly competitive throughout the entire game. Would not be surprised if we see Algier get plenty of touches in those games. And we've seen the Falcons these past 2 weeks now kind of shift their strategy and how they're using their running backs. And that Algier is getting a little bit more playing time because they are just moving Bijan Robinson to wide receiver on those plays rather than taking Robinson off the field. So that's allowing Algier to get on the field a little bit more without leaving Bijan Robinson off the field. We've seen Robinson play over 90% of snaps each of the past 2 weeks, which he's now only done 3 times in his career. So definitely a change in how they're using their running backs, but it allows Algier to get on the field without Robinson getting off. So I think Algier will continue to see a pretty significant amount of playing time just in these next couple weeks when the Falcons' schedule looks very favorable for them.
Yeah, fair. And I mean, look, we all want Bijan to get more touches, and it's definitely good that the snaps are have at least increased here. But yeah, it's undoubtedly frustrating sometimes. Algier had 5 red zone carries last week compared to just 1 for Bijan, and to make matters worse, it's not like the Falcons are out here dominating on the ground in the red zone this season. They rank like 31st in red zone successful play rate on the ground, which is poor, and that is giving Algier more carries than Bijan. So it doesn't make sense to us, or at least to me, obviously, as Bijan fantasy managers, but there's nothing saying that this approach is working either. So, yeah, Tyler Algier, 2 touchdowns this week. Both were 1-yard runs. That would have been the same result if Bijan got the touches. But, yeah, I mean, look, the only thing we could really do is adjust, right? And grab Algier when we need a desperate flex option. Maybe he could punch one in for us, or at the very least as a handcuff here. So absolutely some value there. I know Bijan managers are frustrated, but it's just the way that the Falcons have been deploying this backfield now. So that's the way it is. We got to adjust as we see it. So Brian Robinson is up next, Nate, of the San Francisco 49ers. He made the list last week for us, I guess, or yeah, this week, I guess, first time maybe. Can't remember, but got a little more work this week and could potentially have some handcuff value for us as well, Nate.
Oh yeah, first time in a while, I think, for Robinson to make the list. We've seen a lot of the older running backs not have as much success this year, which we've seen in the past that once running backs reach a certain age that they start performing as well. That's happened with Christian McCaffrey. Saquon Barkley didn't see as much playing time as usual last night. Derrick Henry also potentially going to lose some playing time. But McCaffrey, he has a lot of fantasy value this season, but a lot of that's been because of his receiving. He got plenty of passes this past week. He's caught plenty of passes this season. If you remove 100% of his carries this season, he's still a top 10 fantasy running back this year from his receiving alone. So, as a runner, he hasn't been all that effective, averaging 3.5 yards per carry on the season. Ran 12 times for 30 yards this past week. So, still not that effective in the run game in this game. So, we saw Brian Robinson start to see a little bit more playing time, and Robinson had more carries, had more rushing yards, has been the more effective runner of the two so far this season. And I think San Francisco is realizing that. So I think we're going to start seeing Robinson be more involved in the run game going forward in San Francisco, which might not be enough to give him a ton of fantasy value, but I think there are going to be games where he's getting double digit touches this season. And it's, there's plenty of running backs who are starting running backs who are only getting the low double digit touches and not as good of offenses as San Francisco and don't have the same offensive line that San Francisco has. So San Francisco, their schedule for running backs is relatively favorable for the rest of the season. They have their bye week in there and they have two rough matchups, but they also have four fairly favorable matchups. So he is someone that could be a flex option, could be a borderline running back two option if the 49ers continue to get Robinson more carries as we saw this past week.
Yeah, and like you said, at the very least, definitely worth having the 49ers handcuff at this point, just considering their injury history as a team this season. Like, hopefully they got all their injuries out of the way, but it does make sense that limiting Christian McCaffrey a little more just to not tempt fate kind of makes sense if you're the 49ers. So definitely Robinson should be rostered at this point. But onto Robinson's former team, where we saw a shift in that backfield again with Chris Rodriguez factoring in a decent amount. Nate, what did you see with the Commanders' backfield?
Yeah, so we've seen a number of weeks where Krosky Merritt's been the clear starter, and that changed this past week. It was Chris Rodriguez who started the game, played the second drive of the game. Krosky Merritt came in for the third drive of the game, so that was very reminiscent to what we saw around week 3, week 4 after Austin Eckler's injury. But then even after that point, we saw a rotation between the two. Unlike what we saw in weeks 3 and 4, it was Rodriguez who saw just as many snaps from the fourth drive on as Krosky Merritt. And then unfortunately, Rodriguez suffered an injury, was not able to finish the game. I have not heard an update on Rodriguez's status, so there is a chance Rodriguez is out for some time, in which case you should not pick him up off the waiver wire. But if he is healthy, he appears to be the starter in Washington. And yeah, it's a 3-man rotation because we also see their third down back in there, but Jeremy McNichols. So 3 running back committees aren't typically the best for fantasy, but it's worth noting Washington also has the third best schedule for running backs over the rest of the season. Great matchup against the Miami Dolphins this week. Then they have their bye, some rough outings in there, but then in the fantasy playoffs, they play their 3 division rivals. The Giants, Cowboys, and Eagles run defenses haven't been all that great so far this season. So we could see Rodriguez have some big games in the fantasy playoffs if he's able to get healthy by then.
Yeah, we'll see if he's healthy or not. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense that there's been a little bit of a shift, right? Getting Rodriguez a little more work. Krosky Merritt hasn't been as effective over the past few weeks on the ground, right? So makes sense that they try to switch things up a little bit there. So something to keep an eye on. And then next up is Tajay Spears of the Tennessee Titans. So Tony Pollard did not get traded at the deadline, so it's not like a massive value boost, but there is still room here for Spears to be a usable fantasy option with room to grow his role, Nate.
Oh yeah, he's been a low end RB2 basically since his return because he's been the receiving back for Tennessee, but the Titans are constantly behind in games, so that means Spears is on the field a lot, getting some catches, some runs in there, and he has also been the more effective runner of the two. His rushing grade has been notably better than Tony Pollard since his return. And Tennessee just had their bye week this past week, so typically it's the bye week where we start to see some changes in how teams are using players, so it's at least possible that Spears starts to get even more involved in the run game because he's been the more effective runner so far this season. So pick up Spears, one, because he's that borderline RB2. There's still some teams on a bye week over these next few weeks, so he could be a good fill in for those weeks. But there's also a chance that Spears starts to see more playing time and therefore has more fantasy value and does become that more consistent RB2 over the rest of the season.
Nice. I like that. Yeah, I like Spears. Hopefully, like you said, he continues to work there as the receiving down back. He's going to get that work, but maybe get a few more carries here because, yeah, we do like Tajay Spears could be electric with the ball in his hands as well. So, unfortunately, next up, we did not get Bucky Irving back in week 10 coming out of the team's bye week. Hopefully, in week 11, it doesn't seem optimistic that he'll be back, but we'll see. In the meantime, Sean Tucker is helping to carry the load in the Bucks backfield, Nate.
Oh yeah, we have moved past the running backs who are clear, like have some value, should have some value for at least multiple games over the rest of the season, even if it's low end RB2 or flex value. Now we're at the running backs who could have some value, just depends on other players' injuries, how much playing time these players see. But we saw Tucker run the ball 9 times for 53 yards last week. Rashad White ran one more time with 10 carries, but only gained 38 yards. We had seen White kind of dominate of touches and playing time early on in Bucky Irving's injury. But in recent weeks, the two have gotten a lot closer together in how often they are running with the ball. So White or Tucker's been someone getting plenty of carries these past few weeks. Tampa Bay plays the Buffalo Bills this week, one of the best matchups for fantasy running backs. So assuming Bucky Irving misses another week, it's definitely risky putting Tucker in because you don't know how many touches he'll get, how much playing time he'll get. Maybe Buffalo ends up getting a big lead early on in the game, in which case we would probably see a lot of Rashad White over the rest of the game. But if you're in one of those matchups where you're in a deeper league and you need to take a risk for someone who could have a big game because Buffalo's allowed a ton in the run game. We just saw Devon Achane have a huge game against them. So there's a chance Tucker could have a huge game. There's a chance Tucker could only run the ball 3 or 4 times in the game. So if you're willing to take that risk and Bucky Irving is out for another week, then Tucker is someone who could be in your fantasy lineup this week if you're in a deeper league.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, look, he was definitely more effective than Rashad White on the ground this past week, right? So maybe they do like what they see there and maybe are, give him the ball a few more times, 12 carries in week 8, 9 carries this past week. So they're giving him some opportunity, but like you said, there's still Rashad White to contend with, and we don't know exactly how it's going to break down, but decent matchup here. And again, hopefully we get Bucky Irving back at some point, but in the meantime, Sean Tucker, Rashad White still there. Nate, we might be getting Trey Benson back soon, but just in case he's not, Bam Knight also suffered an injury this past week. So Michael Carter might have some value for us here this week.
Yeah, it's been a similar thing with Arizona where really any of the three running backs could be the one you want. And Michael Carter is there because he's the one who took over as their primary back after Bam Knight suffered the injury. Carter's been the primary back early on in Trey Benson's injury. We've seen Amari DiMercato run very well on limited opportunities these past 2 weeks, but he's kind of remained that third down back. He started to see more opportunities on early downs, but we saw after Knight's injury, it was Michael Carter who was getting the majority of snaps in the normal early down situations. So there's a chance Carter's the best guy. There's a chance DeMercado's the best guy. There's a chance Bam Knight is back and doesn't miss any time, in which case he probably returned to being the starter. Or there's a chance that Trey Benson is back from injury this week, in which case you don't want any of the running backs. But when you have a running back who could be a starter and the lead early down back for a team, they need to at least be included in the waiver wire article. And he's a lot more available than a lot of the other running backs we've talked about so far today.
Yeah, good point. All right, week 9, we saw Devin Singletary significantly involved in the Giants' backfield, but that changed a bit this week. Tyrone Tracy was much more involved, but still some value for Singletary, you think?
Yeah, while he didn't see as high of a percentage of the offensive snaps, he played all 4 snaps at the goal line. He played all 5 snaps in short yardage situations. Sometimes we see that split a little bit and change over time, but Singletary taking all 9 snaps when the Giants were in a situation where they only needed a couple yards is pretty telling that he is going to be their short yardage back going forward. So whenever New York needs a touchdown, it's probably going to be Singletary getting that 1 or 2 yard touchdown. That being said, the Giants did just fire Brian Daboll. Singletary was one of Daboll's guys, so it's possible that Tyrone Tracy sees even a higher percentage of snaps going forward. It's also possible that the coaches like Singletary more and Singletary start seeing more playing time. There's always changes when a team fires a head coach, so we'll see what happens with the Giants' backfield, but it's really only Singletary and Tracy. No one else has seen any offensive snaps for New York this season, so we'll see how this backfield shapes up, but I think there's still a chance that Singletary has some fantasy value, even if he's the RB2 who's vultures some touchdowns here and there.
I like it. All right. So Devin Neal, taking a back seat to Alvin Kamara, but with the Kendra Miller on injured reserve, Neal is really the lone other option in New Orleans at the moment in case something were to happen to Alvin Kamara. Nate.
Yeah, we have started to reach kind of the pure handcuff territory here. Neil has been the third down back, which is good to see, as well as getting some opportunities on early downs, but they kind of stuck with Alvin Kamara pretty significantly this past week. Saints are on a bye week this week, which isn't great, but the Saints have one of the best schedules for running backs over the rest of the season. Basically, a favorable matchup in all 6 of their remaining games in the fantasy season. So if Kamara were to miss any time, I think Neal would basically be a must start option because he'd be getting the clear majority of touches and he would have a favorable matchup each week. So Neal is probably my top pure handcuff option, and he's available in a ton of leagues right now as well.
For sure. Yeah. And then similar situation in Cleveland as well, right? Where Dylan Sampson kind of working as the third down back right now behind Quinshawn Judkins, but also a good handcuff here in case something were to happen to Judkins.
Yeah, it was also good to see that he became the third down back this past week. It had been Jerome Ford playing at least 50% of those third down snaps recently. Sampson did see that increase in playing time on third downs, as well as playing a decent amount in the 2 minute drill, and he has been the clear number 2 running back in early down situations. The Browns do have a much better schedule for running backs over the rest of the way. In my 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high article, I did include Judkins as a buy low option because the Browns have faced difficult matchup after difficult matchup in the run game, and it has a complete 180 over the rest of the season. So I expect the Browns game to be a bit more effective. So if Judkins were to suffer an injury, Sampson would be the clear guy, in which case he'd be a fantasy starter in a lot of those matchups. But even if not in some of these deeper leagues, I do think Sampson will be catching more passes than he's been catching these past few weeks.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, working as that third down back and passing down back is obviously pretty important for a team that we expect to be trailing quite a bit here. But another handcuff this time in Cincinnati, Samaje Perine working as the Chase Brown backup right now, Nate.
Yeah, Piran started to see more playing time recently before he suffered an injury, was getting more involved in the run game, has been averaging 6.2 yards per attempt, so he's been very effective when he's been running the ball. The Bengals have a lot of matchups where they are going to have to score a lot of points, like usual, facing some good offenses. So Piran will also be on the field a lot in those games, assuming he's healthy, because he's the third down back. So games against the Baltimore Ravens twice near the end of the season, at least the Buffalo Bills, Miami Dolphins, all teams who rank in the top 8 in allowing fantasy points to running backs. So Piran could get pretty involved in those games, and he's also here because if Chase Brown suffers an injury, then Piran would dominate the workload, would be a fantasy starter for the rest of the season if that happens. So mostly here for his handcuff value, but I think in some of these really deep 14 team, 16 team leagues, he has some standalone value there as well.
Nice. And then last one at the running back position, potential Derrick Henry handcuff in Keaton Mitchell.
Yeah, Mitchell's been more involved in recent weeks. He's continued to run the ball 4 times each of the past couple games, but he has been very dominant running the ball. Has averaged 6.2 yards per carry this season It was 7.8 yards per carry on Sunday, was averaging 8.4 yards per carry in his rookie season. So he has been incredibly dominant anytime he's been given an opportunity. They already said that they're going to start giving him more chances after he played well this past game. Yeah, Derrick Henry is there, but Henry has not played as well this season as he did last season. The run game hasn't been as effective. I don't see Mitchell overtaking Henry as the early down back in Baltimore, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility with how well Mitchell is playing. And of course, he has the handcuff value where if Henry were to suffer an injury, then Mitchell would be getting the majority of opportunities on early downs and would be a fantasy starter over the rest of the season.
We'll go into the wide receivers in a second, but let you know that this episode is also brought to you by Fabric by Gerber Life. Parenting is filled with high pressure decisions, and it can be difficult to tell if we've made the right choice for our kids' future. But here's a simple decision you can make today that could have a meaningful impact on your kids' future: opening a UGMA kids investment account with Fabric to start their investment journey early and give them a financial head start. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. It's all online, and setting up an account could take you just 5 minutes. Get started investing with as little as $1 a day, then manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. There are no contribution limits, multiple tax advantages, and they're SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus no commission fees and just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Fabric has partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families like yours for over 50 years. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, on to the wide receivers now. And it was only a matter of time before Alec Pierce found the end zone, which is what we've been saying for these past few weeks now. And Alec Pierce did find the end zone this week on top of another strong yardage performance, Nate.
Oh, yeah, he's here this week. He's probably going to be the top wide receiver here next week because the Colts have their bye week, so not enough people are going to be picking him up. But he has been great these past few weeks. He's averaged 14.9 PPR points per game since week 7, which is generally good enough to be a wide receiver, too. Colts have their bye week and then 2 pretty rough matchups immediately after the bye. So if you're picking up Pierce, it's not because you're trying to make the fantasy playoffs. It's because you're trying to win once you're in the fantasy playoffs. The Colts end the season with 4 straight matchups against teams in the top 12 in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. So Pierce should have a pretty strong end of the season after having a pretty strong first half of the season.
Yeah, really strong. I mean, he's gone over 50 yards in 6 of his 8 games this season. He's done it in 4 straight, and he's gone over 80 in back-to-back games. So finally getting that touchdown, obviously that's going to make more fantasy managers notice him and grow that rostership. But like you said, heading into a bye this week, we'll probably still talk about him for one more week after this. Okay, Darius Slayton led the Giants in receiving yards this past week, Nate, because someone has to do it.
Yeah, he was making big catch after big catch. Unfortunately, suffered an injury in there as well, so it'll be interesting to see what his health is like over the rest of the season. But the Giants, like you said, they need someone to play well on offense. They have Wan'Dale Robinson as the number 1 wide receiver. Slayton's their number 2 option in the passing game. It's Theo Johnson at tight end, and outside of that, they've been elevating wide receivers off the practice squad to be their number 3 receiver. Daniel Bellinger has been getting a lot of playing time in 2 tight end sets, so they don't have a ton of options, and the Giants have the 7th best schedule for fantasy wide receivers over the rest of the season. Includes games against the Washington Commanders, Las Vegas Raiders in the fantasy playoffs, 2 of the worst 6 teams at allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. So the schedule's there. We've seen it in the past. He's not going to be someone who's going to be this top 12 wide receiver. So if you're looking for that high upside option over the rest of the season, this probably isn't it. But if you have been hurting at wide receiver and need someone to help fill your fantasy starting lineup, Slayton, both in the short term and long term, assuming he gets back to health, is going to be one of your best options.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll see how he manages the hammy, like you said, and how the offense maybe changes with Brian Daboll gone, but we'll find that out here in the next few weeks. But definitely an option after leading the team in receiving yards in back-to-back weeks now. Okay, next up, Christian Kirk got the spotlight last week. Obviously not the most exciting option. We want the young rookies to get some usage. So I'm very glad to see that maybe things are getting better for Jaden Higgins in Houston, maybe Jalen Noel as well. But for now, Jaden Higgins is on the list after finding the end zone this past week, Nate.
Yeah, it was a really exciting day for Houston for those of you who have liked their rookies. Also, at running back, we saw Woody Marks play like 80% of the snaps. So we saw an increase in snaps, not just by Marks, but Higgins also started to get more involved in those three wide receiver sets. He has been playing in the two wide receiver sets all season long, played an even higher percentage of those snaps than usual this week. But the big thing is he started to play more in those three wide receiver sets, taking time away from Xavier Hutchinson. We saw a similar thing in the slot. We saw Jalen Noel start to take playing time away from Christian Kirk. So we saw a notable change for Houston's offense, and it was working for them. Higgins was the third top player in the passing game this past week. Noel was fourth, with Nico Collins having a good game and Dalton Schultz also playing well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to see Higgins playing time continue to rise. So he is not someone I would want in my starting lineup this upcoming week. But at this point of the season, you want to fill your bench with some of these high upside options. If you are set with your starting lineup, you want to get players who could have a big second half this season. A lot of times it's rookies that you want to pick up. And in this case, you have a rookie who is already starting to see more playing time and he scored this past week. So Higgins is someone that I think definitely worth picking up. I would take him over Noel just because Higgins has a chance to be an every down receiver playing upwards of 80% of snaps, where I think Noel will only be playing in the slot and three wide receiver sets at best. So that's why I have Higgins ahead of Noel. But Noel, if you're in a deeper league as well, at least worth considering because he saw an increase in playing time.
Yeah, definitely like to see this. And like you said, he scored this week, so that helps. He's got 2 touchdowns over his last 3 games, 3 touchdowns on the year. He's been on the field for 20 or more routes in each of the past 4 games as well, after being below that mark in 5 straight to start the year. Texans offense also been a little bit better here recently after that slow start to the year where they were like 0-3, right? I think 4-2 in their last 6. Started playing like 6 offensive linemen on the field a lot more to help their pass protection for CJ Stroud and obviously Davis Mills this past week, but CJ Stroud should be back as well. So yeah, could be some positive stuff here from the Houston offense in the second half of the season. Another rookie who might be in line for more work this week, Nate, because DJ Moore suffered a shoulder injury. So Luther Burden III played a season high 20 routes this past week. Might still get some more work beyond this week if DJ Moore is going to miss some time.
Oh, yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with Moore because he's already been on the injury report the past few weeks with both a hip and a groin injury. So he added a shoulder injury to that. Suffered it in the first half. He was able to return for a lot of the second half, but also did not play near the end of the game. So haven't seen many reports on Moore missing time at the end of the game. Burden was the one to take over anytime that Moore was missing time. So if Moore were to miss games, I'd expect Burden to be a full down receiver. It wasn't like Olamide Zaccheaus, who has been their slot receiver all season. He wasn't seeing an increase in time, so it would just be Burden being that clear other outside receiving option across from Rome Odunze. Burden's been playing pretty well given his opportunities, been making a number of big plays. Wouldn't be surprised if he starts to see an uptick in playing time regardless of the health of the other wide receivers, but especially if Moore misses time now dealing with 3 separate injuries. Would not be surprised to if Moore misses games. The Bears do have a rough matchup against the Minnesota Vikings next week, so not sure I'd want Burden in my starting lineup in a lot of leagues, even if Moore misses one game. But they follow that up with the Pittsburgh Steelers, which would be an excellent matchup. So if Moore misses 2 weeks, Burden could very well be in a lot of fantasy starting lineups in 2 weeks from now. And then just very similar to Higgins in that you want to get these high upside rookies on your bench once you get past all the bye weeks and don't need players who can fill in during bye weeks. Burden, someone who could have a huge second half of the season if the Bears decide to make him a starter, which is at least possible with the injuries at wide receiver. Rome Odunze also been dealing with a heel injury for a number of weeks now.
Yeah, for sure. And Burden, like you said, he's played well. He's actually the highest graded receiver on the team right now with a 77.5 receiving grade. So obviously, limited work is, again, this is the first time that he's actually run 20 routes in a game. But if, he could put that on a larger workload and get some opportunity here with DJ Moore out, we could see a sustained role for the rest of the season. Obviously a high second round pick. So that they'll want to get him involved and see what they got there. But next up, we have not seen Cedric Tillman since week 4 of this year, but he was back in the lineup in week 10. Didn't do much in the box score, but he was still pretty involved in the offense. Nate.
Yeah, basically returned to his old role, was rotated out a little more often than we're used to, but not by a whole lot. Isaiah Bond was someone who was cutting into Tillman's playing time a little bit before Tillman's injury, but since then, Bond had an opportunity to step up with Tillman out and really didn't take too much advantage of that opportunity. So, not worried about Bond cutting into Tillman's playing time at this point. Bond also missed this past week. So Tillman should be a starting receiver for Cleveland the rest of the year. And even though it was a quiet game against the Jets defense, the Browns have the best schedule for wide receivers over the rest of the year. They face the Baltimore Ravens this week, games against Chicago and Pittsburgh in the fantasy playoffs. Two of the three teams that have allowed a lot of fantasy points to wide receivers this year. So even though Cleveland hasn't had the best luck at wide receiver so far this season, there's a chance Tillman steps up in a big way.
Yeah, makes sense. And not exactly where he was prior to the injury in terms of like route share, but figure he'll get more involved now that he's been worked in 1 week already. So I'm going to assume that they were easing him back in as well, but room for Cedric Tillman to play a little bit more. Now, speaking of players that we haven't seen for a while due to injury, Brandon Ayuk hasn't even sniffed the field this season, Nate, but could be back soon.
Yeah, we've been hearing that could be back soon for a while now, so that definitely wasn't true the first couple of times they were saying it, and that's led plenty of fantasy managers to give up on Ayuk and cut him at this point of the season, but there is still a chance that he comes back this year. There's also a chance that he doesn't play at any point this year, but Ayuk, at his best, he was the top 15 fantasy wide receiver in 2023. Definitely unlikely that he returns to that good of a form immediately back from his injury. It's possible the 49ers have been holding him out until Ayuk's 100% rather than letting him play at 90% or 95%. But the 49ers do have some nice matchups during the fantasy playoffs. Uh, we haven't seen consistent great play out of their wide receivers this season. Ricky Pearsall's been injured for a while now as well. Juwan Jennings stepped up a little bit, but we did see Kendrick Bourne start to get rotated out more often this past week. So it seems pretty clear that once some of these other wide receivers are back, Bourne will be someone seeing a decrease in playing time. Not expecting Demarcus Robinson to cut into the playing time of any of the 49ers bigger name wide receivers. So I could see Ayuk being a clear starter if he is able to come back this season. And with those good matchups, someone's going to take advantage of them. So there's at least a chance it's Ayuk. So he is someone that I would pick up, and there's a chance he can be a starter in the fantasy playoffs, even if it seems like a slim chance at this point.
Yeah, look, it's always going to be difficult, to hit the ground running, coming off a ACL, MCL injury. So we'll see, if he could get maybe worked in and then up to speed before the fantasy playoffs, so we kind of have a better feel of what to expect from him until the games really matter, right? So, yeah, worth a shot there on Ayuk if you're looking for somebody, and then Chimere Dike coming out of a bye. He's been one of the better, if not the best, Titans receiving option recently, and obviously been a stud in leagues that reward return yardage as well, Nate.
Yeah, he's someone we've talked about for a couple weeks now, had those big games. He's been consistently playing in two wide receiver sets, which hasn't been true for Van Jefferson or Alec or Calvin Ridley's been out with an injury for a while. A chance Ridley's back this week, which could cut into DK's playing time a little bit, but would not be surprised if he is the number two wide receiver for Tennessee over the rest of the season. He is another just rookie player that I think is worth picking up to see if he continues to play well over time, but also a chance that with Tennessee's offense, he also has a couple of pretty quiet games in there as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then we'll go on to some wide receivers who are rostered in fewer than 2% of leagues now, Nate. Starting with Tyler Lockett of the Las Vegas Raiders leading the way here.
Yeah, so Jacoby Myers was traded away, traded to Jacksonville, opening the door for more opportunities for the Raiders wide receivers. Tyler Lockett was playing out of position as their X receiver the week before Myers' trade, but this past week he moved back to the slot, which is where he's played at least 170 snaps every year of his NFL career, where he has a lot of familiarity with the slot role. And he was the Raiders' leading receiver this past week, caught 5 passes for 44 yards. I think he can continue to be someone who gets at least a couple of catches each week, but he is here primarily because he is facing the Dallas Cowboys this week. The Cowboys have allowed a ton of fantasy points in the passing game this season. Expect Brock Bowers to have a much better game this week, but also think Lockett can make a number of catches against this Cowboys defense. So if you're in one of these deep leagues and need a wide receiver specifically for this week, I think Lockett's at least worth considering. And there's a chance he could have some value in some of these deep leagues for the long term, just because someone needs to step up among these Raiders wide receivers.
Yeah, somebody definitely does. All right, let's one of the trades that we did get last week was AD Mitchell going from the Colts to the Jets as part of the Sauce Gardner trade. I don't know that he'll have much more success in New York at this point, but look, it's only year 2 for him. He has speed. Maybe he could be wide receiver 2 in New York. Maybe.
Yeah, there's at least opportunity there because the Jets need a wide receiver. Their top two wide receivers from the start of the season, Garrett Wilson, just re-injured his knee. He was out for 2 weeks with that knee injury. Now it looks like he'll miss more time with that injury. Josh Reynolds currently on injured reserve. There hasn't really been much consistency among the other receivers. Alan Lazard at times has been a starting lead receiver for the Jets. This past week, he was a healthy inactive for the Jets. Tyler Johnson's also been one of their receivers who at times has been inactive, at times has been a starter. The rookie Arian Smith has also been there, but the Jets passing game really hasn't done much. And I think there's a chance that Mitchell could be the top passing option for this offense for the rest of the season, especially if Garrett Wilson's injury continues to linger on. I think what's worth noting with Mitchell is he has been a deep threat at times with Indianapolis. Hasn't always had the quarterbacks to throw those deep passes to him, but he's seen 25 deep targets over the past 2 seasons, which is 10 more than any other wide receiver currently on the Jets. And Justin Fields, we saw earlier in his career in 2022, 2023. This is assuming Fields remains the starting quarterback, but Fields was one of the top quarterbacks in how often he would throw the ball deep. So I could see Mitchell filling a part of the Jets offense that they've really been missing this season. And Mitchell was someone who in our 2024 big board was our fourth wide receiver ahead of Brian Thomas Jr., Troy Franklin, Landon McConkey. So at least coming out of college, we thought highly out of Mitchell, and we've seen other players change teams, and that dramatically change how well a player is playing. So yeah, a lot of things have to go right for Mitchell to get there, but I think the ingredients are right for Mitchell to potentially have a big second half of the season. So if you want to take a lottery ticket on someone who is available in 98.5% of leagues and you have a spot in your bench, I think Mitchell is someone worth keeping an eye on. He is someone that in some of my deeper leagues I was trying to get after the Jets traded for him. Also worth noting, he was inactive this past week, which wasn't great to see, but he had only been on the team for a couple of days. We saw other wide receivers who were with new teams active and playing, but those were teams that had more injuries at wide receiver. Jacksonville, basically all of their wide receivers are injured, and Seattle as well. They have several injuries at wide receiver, so it was not surprising to see other wide receivers active that were with new teams and Mitchell inactive.
Yeah, like you said, not impossible. Obviously, Justin Fields is going to have to throw more than 54 yards. He's now thrown for under 55 yards in a game 4 times this season, which is insane. And then obviously, Garrett Wilson getting injured before recording a single fantasy point is a killer as well. So, but at the same time, could be some more opportunity there for AD Mitchell to get more involved in this offense. We'll see how it works out. But yeah, Jets offense, our Jets passing offense specifically, definitely needs to pick up some slack there. And then last wide receiver on the list, Nate, is the Minnesota Vikings wide receiver Jalen Naylor, who put up 124 receiving yards and a touchdown, which was as much receiving yards as every other Vikings receiver combined in week 10. So was Naylor involved enough to trust going forward, Nate?
He was at least enough to include at the bottom of the list. He's been the Vikings' third wide receiver the entire season. Was the number 2 wide receiver when Jordan Addison was out with suspension at the start of the year. But Naylor's role has been consistent, playing 84% of snaps in 11 personnel, only seeing a couple of snaps here and there in 2 wide receiver sets. Typically, when someone is the clear number 3 wide receiver, you probably don't want him in your fantasy league because Justin Jefferson, the clear number 1, Jordan Addison, the clear number 2. But I did think he was worth considering because not only did he have this good game, but the Vikings have one of the best schedules for wide receivers over the rest of the year. they have the second best one. It's 5 of their next 7 opponents in the top 10 in allowing fantasy points to wide receivers. So just consistent good game out of good game for the Vikings players. A good time to try trading for the Vikings other wide receivers after Naylor outperformed them. But I think the Vikings passing offense can have a great second half of the season. So Naylor, there's a chance he can have another big game or two in there, even though we probably won't know when those games are occurring. But if you're in one of these 14 team leagues or 16 team leagues, Naylor has a chance to have some pretty big value in some of these games, or at least catch 2 or 3 passes here and there. TJ Hawkinson really hasn't been doing all that much at tight end. So that's been one of the bigger reasons to avoid Naylor in the past, is he's been the 4th option in the passing game. But now it seems like he's at least the 3rd option in the passing game.
Yeah, frustrating for TJ Hawkinson. Just has not been all that impactful this year. We'll see. Again, we got some time left, obviously, in the season for that to turn around. But yeah, Jalen Naylor obviously had a big game this past week, so definitely capable. Let's go on to the tight ends now. And leading us off is a top 10 rookie pick, Colston Loveland, who finished second on the team in receiving yards this past week, though still has to deal with Cole Kmet, unfortunately. So he's not fully unchanged just yet.
Oh, yeah, caught the 4 passes for 55 yards, which is good to see a week after catching the 6 passes for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like you said, the only concern is Cole Kmet is back. Kmet ended up playing more than Colston Loveland this past week. Loveland is still being used more in the passing game, Kmet more as a run blocker. So that's at least good to see, but we would like to see Loveland on the field more, running more routes when the Bears are passing the ball. So Loveland is probably the more risky option compared to some of the others we'll talk about. But again, you want to be getting these guys who have high upside over the second half of the season. And Loveland was the 10th overall pick in the NFL draft for a reason. He played very well in college, and the Bears have some pretty good opponents over the rest of the season as well. So that playing time is still an issue for Loveland, but I think if he can start to see more playing time, running more routes when the Bears are passing the ball, he can be a top 10 fantasy tight end over the rest of the way. So if you are willing to take that risk at tight end, I think Loveland is the best option that you can pick up.
Yeah, only a matter of time before we start to see him really take over that full tight end 1 role in Chicago, I think. And look, the Bears' the offense has been obviously much better this season as well, right? So the changes they made this offseason, obviously head coach being the biggest one, but Caleb Williams' improvement as well. So we want these guys that are in these good offenses, and Chicago has definitely been a good offense this season. Now, next up, Dalton Schultz. He's been on this list before. It just delivered the top 5 fantasy performance. So for fantasy managers who maybe recently lost Tucker Kraft, or have Tyler Warren or Jawan Johnson on a bye this week, maybe Schultz here can be your Huckleberry in week 11, Nate.
Yeah, there were a lot of these like veteran tight ends who are only available in 10-team leagues that had good weeks. Cade Otton had a big week, and it doesn't sound like the other wide receivers for Tampa Bay are coming back this week. Johnson had a pretty good week, but he's been a little inconsistent. Juwan Johnson, another one who had a big game and could continue to have some big games now that Rashid Shaheed's no longer on the team. But all of them probably only available in 10-team leagues. And out of all of them, Dalton Schultz is probably the one that I would want the most. Schultz, like you said, had a big week. He's averaged 13.8 PPR points per game since week 6, which is the 8th best mark for tight ends. So just the fact that he has been so consistent week in and week out, where some of the other tight ends that I just mentioned, a little less consistent. I'm a little bit worried about the Texans' schedule. It's not the best for tight ends, as well as I mentioned all of those rookies for Houston starting to see more playing time. They could start cutting into the touches of Dalton Schultz, but he has just continued to see high target share out of high target share. So Schultz is probably the safer option that you can get out of all the players we're talking about, that if you need a tight end for the short term or even the long term, Schultz is someone who can be in fantasy starting lineups and have at least that borderline tight end 1, tight end 2 fantasy value.
Yep. And then next up, Darren Waller. He's still obviously on injured reserve, but decent playoff schedule. We keep talking about him, Nate, for Miami.
Yeah, will hopefully be back by then. Faces the Steelers and Bengals in the fantasy playoffs, 2 of the 3 worst teams at preventing fantasy points to tight ends this season. So 2 very good matchups. Waller was a top 10 fantasy tight end when he was healthy. We don't know if he will be healthy for the fantasy playoffs or how healthy he will be, but I think there's a chance Waller can be a star in the fantasy playoffs, be a potential top 5 option during those games. So if you might need a fantasy tight end for those weeks, I would want Waller stashed on my bench until then.
Yep, makes sense. Health always the biggest concern with Darren Waller, but like you said, when he's healthy, he's been really good. So next up, Isaiah Likely continues to kind of be stuck in the shadow of Mark Andrews, Nate, but we're always going to be hopeful that he can emerge at some point.
Yeah, he's really here because the Ravens' schedule for tight ends is excellent. It's the best one for tight ends over the rest of the season. Have a 5-game stretch where they're facing the Bengals twice, the Steelers, the Patriots, and the Packers, all of whom rank in the top 10 in allowing fantasy points to tight ends this season. Cincinnati, the team that they play twice, has allowed the most. The Steelers, the third most. So excellent schedule. I could see any number of the Ravens tight ends having successful games those weeks. I think there will be games where Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely both rank in the top 12 in fantasy points. We just don't know which weeks they will occur, which weeks it'll be Likely who has a good game, which weeks it'll be Andrews who has a good game. So there's a constant risk in having Likely in your fantasy lineup, but I think there will be a number of weeks where he is a top 10 fantasy tight end the rest of the way.
Nice. And then lastly, Pat Fryermuth has been relatively productive recently, even with Jonnu Smith on the roster. So he makes the list this week.
Oh yeah, Darnell Washington also messing with that Steelers tight end rotation, but we have seen a bit of stability recently where Fryermuth is at least the one typically in on third downs, as well as seeing some of those snaps in 2 tight end sets. He has been the most productive as a receiver over these past couple weeks. But the big thing here is if you are looking for a tight end specifically for this week, the Steelers play the Cincinnati Bengals. When they played each other a couple weeks ago in week 7, Fryermuth had 5 receptions for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. Certainly not expecting Fryermuth to repeat those numbers, but this is a very good matchup. Bengals have allowed the most fantasy points to tight ends this season, and if there's any Steelers tight end that I would want to take a risk on right now, it is Fryermuth. So if you're in one of these deeper leagues, need a tight end for this week, Fryermuth could be your best option.
Nice. All right. That is going to wrap us up for this week. So thank you to everybody who tuned in. Again, as always, good luck attacking those waiver wires. Make sure to stay active here, especially at this point in the season. Obviously, if you're tuning into this episode, you are one of those active participants in your league and looking to make your team better every single week. So thank you all for watching. And for Nate putting this list together, as always, too, please let everybody know what you got going on over at pff.com this week.
Sure, I have the recap articles to all of the games that have happened these past couple of days. Also have the waiver wire articles. So if we do get any more injury news today, that might influence where someone is, especially some of those running backs with Arizona, Tampa Bay. Maybe we get some more news that influences things. Also, the Darius Slayton, DJ Moore injuries could get some news today. Have 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high. It is worth checking when the trade deadline is in your fantasy league. A lot of leagues, this is the last week to make trades, and a lot more leagues. Next week is the last week to make trades, so we'll only have 2 more of those 5 articles this year. Have rest of season rankings, have dynasty rankings. We'll have the rankings for this upcoming week up today. We'll have start sit on Thursday, and then we'll continue it all again next week.
Love it. So yeah, make sure to check all that out. Use PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 as a promo code to get 25% off a PFF Plus subscription. Obviously, all that stuff powered by the best data in the league here at PFF and the best data collection team in the multiverse over here at PFF as well. As for me, IDP Fantasy Report is out now. That'll get added. The Monday Night Football team games will be added in there as well here in the next few minutes, or it'll be updated by the time you listen to this. All the snap shares for all IDPs, waiver targets, all that stuff. IDP rankings will be out. Wide receiver man zone coverage report, that'll be out tomorrow. And then the red zone report will be out on Friday. So thank you to everybody for tuning in. And we'll see you all in Thursday. I guess I'll be back for the IDP Start Sit show. And then we'll see you next week. Good luck in week 11. And until next time, peace out.